لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا فمن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. You just never know when I might turn up on time. See, you never know when I might. So, mashallah, I want to extend some special appreciation for those of you who came on time, who probably come on time regularly. Mashallah. Um, today for the prompt, Runna sent me a message which mentioned that we wanted to talk about deen and culture. And the first thing that I want to do there is I want to remove this false dichotomy. There's no such thing as a person that lives without culture, right? Even the way we act upon our religious convictions will be conditioned by culture, right? Some culture, right? I mean, in a certain sense, human beings spin culture in the same way that spiders spin webs. It's just a natural. It's kind of an accumulated and shared enterprise of what's being done, how it's being done, the kind of place it has in kind of the overall culture, right? This is a tautology, a redundant definition, using the word culture to define the word culture. But in this case, it's actually quite well placed because culture is that intrinsic to our beings, right? It's very intrinsic to our lives. It's something that we naturally do. And deen is usually expressed in terms of cultural significance or relevance. What I think we need to focus on is how we understand culture, right? I find that many of us have a very diminished, a very estimated, kind of role, or we see ourselves as having a diminished role in the production of the cultures to which we belong. Sometimes I think people who don't think critically about culture, they think about it as this one static line that has a beginning point and reaches us. That's never the way that culture is lived or conveyed. Every generation, and for the sake of class, we'll call them the custodial generation, the people who take custody of a culture. They actively add to it. They actively subtract from it. They amplify certain things. They suppress other things. They alter things. And those alterations, those changes, they occur in a very organic way, right? And so, rather than thinking about culture as this diametric opposite to deen, I think it's much more useful to think about the kinds of cultures you want to participate in, the kinds of cultures you want to build, the kinds of cultures that resonate with you, and putting yourself in places where you can build those cultures. You can participate in those cultures. You can shape those cultures, form those cultures. And when you do so, and this is where I think you have to have some skill and maybe even some genius. You don't do so as a break with your cultural antecedents. You don't do so as a break with the culture that preceded you, but rather you do so as kind of a carrying forth, but an empowered carrying forth, right? It's not that, I have to exactly duplicate the culture of my parents. Well, my parents grew up in Syria, or my parents grew up in Palestine. My parents grew up in Ghana, or my parents grew up in India, or my parents grew up in Bangladesh. So I'm growing up in the United States of America. I've come of age in the United States of America. English is my first language, and there's a a whole host of, cultural kind of understandings that are very natural to me. You have to see yourself as augmenting that ancestral culture. It's becoming something different because you are becoming something different. It's like when you look at, members of kind of the African diaspora, some African Americans, we call ourselves Afro-Saxons, because yes, in terms of our usul or there's a blood connection to the continent of Africa, certainly. And there's a cultural connection as well. There are certain things that many anthropologists have identified in African-American speech, African-American traditions, methods of storytelling, cuisine, that certainly you can see, a connection with the African continent. But then you have other things that have nothing to do with Africa, like jazz music. It doesn't use percussion is featured in jazz, but not nearly as prominently as a lot of wind instruments, string instruments, etc. And these are part of a Western European heritage that, of course, is something that we come into contact with by virtue of being in the United States of America. So culture keeps going. So like one historian who's a friend of mine said, we left Africa as Africans, but since then we've become so much more. And by more, he didn't mean so much greater, not so much greater, but we've added so many different strands of culture by virtue of being in the United States of America. And that culture also shows up linguistically. That culture shows up religiously. It shows up in our cuisine. It shows up in our poetry. It shows up in our writing. It shows up in our performing arts. It shows up everywhere, right? It shows up in our familial, culture. It shows up everywhere. So I think the empowerment and the boldness that I think this generation of Muslims needs is a boldness that allows you to see yourself not as someone that isn't living up to the ideals of your culture, but someone who's transforming that culture. Like, I am that, right? So this is kind of like a cultural imposter syndrome. You can't have that. There is nobody, if you have two DIC parents or two Palestinian parents or two Bangladeshi parents, there is no one by blood more Bangladeshi than you. There is no one by blood more DIC than you. There is no one by blood more Palestinian than you, right? You are just deciding to perhaps venture into some areas, to do some things that might be unprecedented, among people of your culture. That's okay. If you are of a mixed, ethnicity or ancestry, even more, your very being might be unprecedented, or your very being is not, it's like you are a cultural connector. So you have a connection to a DIC culture and an Arab culture, if you're multi-ethnic in that way, or a white American culture and a Black American culture, or a white American culture and an Arab culture. And everything that comes out of that is completely and perfectly authentic, right? It doesn't have to be seen as ersatz or fake or no. Now, in terms of how Deen relates to that, Deen is not the diametric opposite of culture, but rather creates parameters inside of broad parameters, inside of which culture can be given birth to. You see, it creates broad parameters inside, because if there's a cultural practice that is haram, right? We as Muslims, we cannot identify with that as a cultural practice, right? So that means, like, it's in my culture, it's customary that on one's anniversary, you would drink champagne or you would drink wine. Obviously, that is an aspect of my culture that I'm no longer able to act upon in that way, right? Now, I can transform the practice. And it's interesting, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Man minkum yara munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadi." Whoever among you, now mind you, this is very important, I think, in terms of this discussion. You know, the Prophet ﷺ is speaking to the companions, and they have a culture. You know, the companions are not a cultural blank slate. They're not a cultural tabula rasa. They're a cultural blank slate. And they're not a cultural blank slate. They have a culture. They have, right? They have a culture. And so he says to them, whoever among you sees something wrong, let him or her change it with their hand, which is kind of like, you don't have to be culturally predatory, nor do you have to be a person who seeks to obliterate culture, but rather transform culture so that those aspects of your, ancestral or given culture, transform them into something that complies with the faith, transform them into something that is God-pleasing. So, okay, we normally drink champagne. People in my culture drink champagne on their anniversaries. Of course, we drink what all Muslims drink, Martinelli's. We drink Martinelli's or, Welch's sparkling grape, or, and we use, very, very nice crystal, and we give a toast. And so we still want to engage our culture, but we want to do so in a religiously acceptable way. Right. So, yeah, I think, I don't think anyone should feel ashamed. And when I find the older generation shaming their children for not being culturally Palestinian enough, not being culturally Yemeni enough, not being culturally Nigerian enough, Somali enough, that's always puzzling to me. It's like, okay, you bring your family, whether you did so out of choice, right? You are a person who immigrated out of choice, and maybe seeking upward mobility, seeking relative political freedom. You came here, and many of the Muslim immigrants to this country have actually found some of what they were seeking. Right? They've actually found some of what they were seeking, upward mobility, relative political freedom. But the expectation that your children would not be impacted at all from leaving India and coming to Chicago and attending public schools and growing in their, familiarity with American culture, and attaining complete English, fluency, and going to university, and establishing a career. Did you think that this would not impact them at all? Right? Did you think that they could do all of that, but we're still going to behave as though this is UP, this is Uttar Pradesh? That's unrealistic, and it's often shame-inducing, and it's, to me, delusional, because the choice to raise your family here is a choice that you made. If you wanted the child to come of age as though he or she were living in Karachi or Damascus or Cairo or Baghdad, then why didn't you stay there? But the idea that they would come of age in Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or Deerfield or Elgin or Houston or Florida, but not be, affected, impacted, shaped by their surroundings, that's unrealistic. That's unrealistic. And then if you feel that there are cultural ideals that you wish the younger generation embodied more thoroughly, more fully, then you have to take responsibility for not teaching them those ideals, right? Or at the very least, not making it, or perhaps, stated more precisely, not making a compelling case for those ideals. Maybe you attempted to, but those things just weren't attractive to them, right? And I've experienced this. I remember once being in Egypt and visiting an African-American family, Muslim family, living in Egypt that was doing very well. I was there as a student, but this brother and his wife, they were both there on business. And so, they had a very nice villa, and the service economy in the majority Muslim world is different than the service economy in America. In America, if somebody has a driver, you would assume this person to be very wealthy. In Egypt, you have people with like 89 Honda Civics, they have drivers, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Which is just, they trip me out. He's sitting in the back, and you would think it was like a Rolls Royce Phantom or something. He's sitting in the back and read his newspaper. He's got his driver up there, but it's actually like an 89, 89 Toyota of some sort or something like that. But it's very common for people to hire help around the house, right? It's very common. So they had a live-in housekeeper, and of course, entering the home, the first thing I did, after greeting him and his wife and his children, was talk to her. How are you? How are things? She was Sudanese. How are you? How are things? How's your family? How's your health? Making small talk. How's this neighborhood? Where where are you from, etc. His son looked at the father and said, "Dad, why is he talking to her? Like, why is he talking to her?" And in that moment, I felt the betray. I felt that his father had betrayed an African-American cultural ideal. Because what do you mean? That's us. What do you mean? Why am I talking to her? You haven't taught your children to respect, to dignify, to elevate, to be concerned about people like her? Then to my mind, then you're not really teaching him how to be a Black American. Because people like that, that's us, that's me, that's my grandmother. That's my aunt. Right? What do you like? So I felt in that moment that his father had betrayed like a cultural ideal. Like, we're not, to be Black American is to be someone that would never say, "Dad, why is he talking to her? Why is he talking to the health? Why is he talking? What?" Right? I get that. So I understand like those kinds of cultural ideals. The only thing I said to him was, Habib, you have to teach. I know you're over in Egypt and you're doing very well, working offshore. But you have to make sure you make a concerted effort. And maybe this is how Egyptians of his class background, they were wealthy in Egypt. Maybe this is how Egyptians of his class background, this is how they regard, their domestic employees. But we as a people, we don't do that, and he accepted that. He said, "You know what? I have to do more to talk to my children about where we come from, who we are, and why that statement to you, a Black man from America, was like a foul stench that went through the entire house." So I get when you change places, sometimes it's difficult to give things that you think are meaningful. That's what I'm intending by that story. It's difficult when you change places to convey things that you think are meaningful, but you have to try. And then to my earlier point, if that kind of identification with the poor, people working in service capacities, the under-resourced, people, if that kind of identification with those kinds of people don't happen for his son because he has no context, like he didn't grow up in America, grew up in Egypt, was always wealthy, then his father would have to accept that. His father couldn't say, "You're really not a Black man." No, he is a Black man, but he's a Black man that was raised in Egypt from a very privileged background, whose father did not convey that wasn't able to convey that cultural ideal that, I think is important, and I'm sure you think is also important, right? But that's what it means to be a parent, right? So all of this shame inducement, and you're not really Desi, you're not really Palestinian, you're not really Nigerian. I personally think that's just such a retrograde way of looking at culture. No, I am that, but I am that in America. I am that becoming, something else. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in. MashaAllah. We have the privilege of having Sara Hamdan, MashaAllah. Assalamu alaikum, Sara.
Staz, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm well. How are things at Iman?
Things are going well. It's just trying to meet people where they're at in this moment, and just just try to make sure that folks have access to the resources that they need, and just feel, especially just with all this talk about the vaccine and stuff, and just, recognizing a lot of the hesitancy that people have, and, the mistrust around, the medical institution, just trying to honor that and respect that, and just still make sure that folks have access to just education tools and information to just make best decisions for them and their families. So
yeah, no, it's subhanallah, man. I think that there's been much written about kind of the distrust of the medical profession among Black communities especially, and I imagine that's a very wide chasm to bridge in terms of trying to encourage people to get vaccinated.
Absolutely. And I just want to say I appreciate everything that you just talked about. And I actually do have a question that I think is related
Sure.
a little bit to what I just brought up. But also I think kind of touches upon, some of what you shared around culture. But, the idea, that we hear in Islam a lot, that the prayers of the God hears the prayers of the oppressed, and just the power in the prayer of the oppressed. And so I think these days, how are we understanding who's considered the oppressed, just given the intense inequalities and inequities that we have, just the growing wealth gap in the country and really across the world, mass incarceration. How are we understanding who the oppressed is? And also I think a caveat to that question too maybe is is that even for us to be questioning that, or do we just take God answers the prayers of the oppressed at face value? Is it not for us to assign definitions of who the oppressed are?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yeah, I think it's the thing about these hadith is one in attempting to understand them, you have to pay very close attention to the one who is being addressed, right? So if you look at, say, people praying, right? People praying, God says, فَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِي. So if someone is going to raise their hands to appeal to God, the verse says, if my servants ask about me, then indeed I am close, right? I respond to every supplicant, every person who prays to me, I respond to them. We have another verse that says Allah is closer to us min hablil warid, than our aorta or our jugular veins. So if we're thinking about the place of our prayer with God. Being oppressed, we should not think that my prayer with God would be more effective were I oppressed. That's not no, your prayer with God is always effective, right? This hadith about the dua of the oppressed is a warning. You don't want to be an oppressor, because if that person prays against you, know that their prayer is being heard by God. That's what that hadith is about. It's not about people calling on God. It's about how you treat people, right? So that if someone is in fact oppressed and you are their oppressor and they say, Ya Allah, alayka bi fulan. Oh Allah, I call upon you to deal with so-and-so. The Prophet, peace be upon him, is telling you, you don't want that. You don't want to be that for your wife. You don't want to be that for your children. You don't want to be that for your neighbor. You don't want to be that for your colleague. And by the way, this hadith does not stipulate that the person is Muslim. This hadith does not stipulate that the person prays in the way that we pray. It's just saying that desire for justice among someone or among people being oppressed, that is heard by God. So be very careful, right? Be very, very careful and try, especially with people, that could be experiencing oppression, to be very, very gentle and to be very respectful and to be very mindful so that you don't wind up, in their prayers against you. You understand what I'm saying? In terms of who is actually oppressed, it's so difficult in a world like ours. It's exceedingly difficult. It's becoming more and more difficult because, almost everything in life is relative. So while I could talk about my own community and talk about, wealth inequality, I could talk about the fact that there's been no truth and reconciliation around reparations. I could talk about mass incarceration. I could talk about all of the quality of life indices that, we would look and say, this is an oppressed community in the United States of America. And then I could compare that community with the vast majority of the world's population. And they're still, in almost all factors, better off than the vast majority of the world's population. You know what I'm saying? So that, it becomes, I think it becomes something that we must understand on two tracks. For the person experiencing anything, be it oppression or otherwise, I think your task is to try to express some gratitude. I think that, I know that, some could interpret that as a spiritual bypass, but I think, if you're a person of color in America, a Black person in America, a Latino person in America, Arab in America, Desi in America, or what have you, you should, I think spiritually, you want to try to be in a place of gratitude for what God has given you spiritually. I don't think that, any of us, when it comes to our appeal to the Most High, should be in anything other than a state of gratitude, right? On the other hand, when it comes to, in any context, addressing, there has been a Khalid Haroun sighting. There has been a Khalid Haroun sighting, but when it comes to, in any context, addressing an inequality of opportunity, not an inequality of outcomes, right? Inequality of outcomes is something different. But when there is an inequality of opportunity in any given context, right? In any given social context, the people who are the beneficiaries of that inequality, the people who would benefit from maintaining that unconscionable status quo should be very concerned that they're not oppressors, right? Should be very concerned that they are oppressors, excuse me, right? So I think, to make things probably infinitely more complicated for you, Sada, and I'm sorry, I think you have different, kind of implied understandings that are happening at every level, right? You have different things that we should be thinking about at every level, right? So those of us in any situation should be, trying to assume an attitude of gratitude, like, alhamdulillah, right? Not, I'm oppressed. On the other hand, when it comes to addressing social inequality, we should speak, very clearly to those inequalities. And if we use the term oppression, then, that's probably accurate. So I don't know. It's quite complicated, quite complex. I think that all of this is contextual, and the usage of the different terms depends largely on, who you're addressing and for what, if that makes any sense. I don't know if I'm being clear.
No, that was all very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, just who you're addressing and for what. Are you trying to encourage people to fight for justice? Are you trying to encourage people to be thankful? Are you trying to encourage people to, think about how they can contribute to a fairer, more just world? I mean, what's the? I think it depends on what we're attempting to do. Inshallah. Other questions, ideas, insights,
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam, Ala.
So obviously we know that like language is a huge part of culture, like how we use it and in what context. And so specific to the Muslim community, obviously there are limitations with like we would never call like a translation of the Quran like the Quran, right? It's like, oh, this is not the literal word of God for obvious reasons.
Right.
And I guess sometimes even as like a native Arabic speaker, like sometimes I'll go to classes or I'll be at the masjid and like, the dua is done in Arabic and I don't even fully understand it. And I'm looking around and I'm like, I don't even know how the rest of you all are managing. And like my parents, like, I mean, my Arabic is not terrible, but it's also, I'm not like, anything special either. So I guess like from your vantage point as someone who is using language to impart Islam and knowledge, and then also as a byproduct of that, create Muslim culture out here in the West, like, are there limitations that we need to be mindful of? And is there room for like more expansion? Like,
I think there certainly is. I mean, I think, as Muslims, we already have, most Muslims, not all, but most, do have some devotional connection to Arabic. They pray in Arabic. Many read the Quran, in Arabic. Many listen to the Quran in Arabic. So I don't think that we're in danger of losing contact with our sacred language, kind of that, the sacredness of Arabic, Quranic Arabic. On the other hand, I think in spaces that we can use other languages in the dua, the language of the khutbah, making sure that important books are translated. I actually think that we need, Ala, mashallah, you bring up a very, very good point. I think we need to develop kind of a devotional English. It's almost like, and some of you that have never been to a church or don't attend church, I'm assuming most of you probably don't attend church. There is a devotional English that is used in sermons. It's certain words, certain expressions, certain intonation, certain inflection that you would not hear, even though they're only speaking English. You would not hear these words said in this way except in the context of a sermon, right? You just would not hear them. I think that we need a similar kind of, connection to English, and Spanish, right? It's interesting that, this is how I know that we're still, as the American Muslim community, we're still a relatively young community. We're talking 100 years, at best, and with 100 years and with a lot of not a seamless 100 years, a lot of different kind of interruptions and deletions and additions, and right. But many people now say that our Muslim community has achieved, what you would call a first effective settlement. That the way the Muslim community looks now demographically, this might be the way that it looks going forward. Now, of course, Allah can do what he wants, right? But kind of the demographic pie chart, if you will, of our community ethnically, this might be a pretty good representation of what it looks like. But one of the things that makes me, reminds me of how young our community is that whenever I hear somebody giving a khutbah in English, I can tell, even if the speaker is, white American or African American, it's still like Arabic translated into English, right? The term, like the style is like we're still not speaking in our own voices yet. It's like, okay, that's like the way that you built the concept, the examples that you used. This is all from Arabic sources. This is like traditional or even contemporary Arabic sources that you are now just translating into English. And then you wonder why people are falling asleep or why people don't feel a connection, because it's really not in their language. And Allah says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا رَسُولًا إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ. We only, whenever God sends a messenger, he sends that messenger with the language of the people, right? And language is much more than words, right? It's much more than words. It's words, but it's attitudes, understandings, dispositions, etc., expressed through words, right? It's not only denotation, but it's also connotation. Like, why this word and not that word? Why? It's almost like, look, if you want to get 100% real with this, try talking to any American Muslim woman about obedience to her husband. Oh, you're not going to get far with that. I guarantee you're not going to get far. Oh, you won't get far with that. You're not going to get far with that. No. That because the connotation of obedience for us, for American English, speakers, either this person is in my custody and decidedly my subordinate, right? You're obedient to me. So we might use it for children, or worse yet, we might use it for animals, right? My dog is obedient, right? If on the other hand, you say, the expectation within a Muslim family is that as long as, the husband is asking for support on things that are good and reasonable, there's an expectation that his wife is tractable. She's tractable. She's amenable to, support, amenable to consensus, amenable to, right? Even though the concepts are similar, one sounds like, okay, a recipe for some harmony, right? No ship can sail with, two captains if the goal is to be united. The other sounds like something demeaning, something demoralizing, and something reserved for a child or an animal, and not a sagacious, smart, intelligent adult human being. Because the language is different. So when you talk about the language of the people, you have to know not only the denotation of words, but the connotation of words. And I still think that we're maybe 50, 60 years off from really being able to talk about deen in a way that doesn't have the baggage of other languages. But I think the only way that we get better at it is by writing poetry, song, people putting together, plays, novels. We have to create spaces where we can intentionally kind of cultivate our own language. Also, like what you would call like homolytic language, or language for du'as. We have to actually do that. So I'm with you 100% at that. I think, yes, I spent a considerable amount of time, trying to learn Arabic, and I'm still learning. Arabic is a deep and wondrous language, right? Arabic is really an amazing language. But I think that if our community is going to mature, and the other thing too, and this is what, some people like this and some people don't, as we become more comfortable with the use of English in our devotional and educational spaces, English is the language that unites us. See, English is the language of the American Muslim community, no doubt about it. It's the language that we have in common. So like Ella, you speak, Arabic, and Khalid speaks Urdu, and someone else might speak a different language, but the language we have in common is English, right? So English will become kind of the language of the American Muslim community. And I just think that, if we're going to be serious about Islam in America, and that's a big topic, a big mission, it's going to require some independence from some of our ancestral homelands, and that might make some people uncomfortable. Islam here is not going to be a reproduction of Islam in Pakistan. Islam here is not going to be a reproduction of Islam in Damascus. It's not going to be a reproduction of Islam in Mali. It's just not. It's going to be something that incorporates elements from kind of the Islamic cultures of all of those places. But then it's going to be something that has its own identity and flavor too. And I think that the thing is, like, are you ready for that? Like I ask people all the time, are you ready to enter a masjid that doesn't have a dome and minarets? Or can you still see that space as sacred? Right? Or are you so like, it's like, okay, people say we want like an American Islamic culture. Okay, what about a mosque design that's not like, right? But it's not also a repurposed building. It's not a house or like MCC, a theater that, became no, it is something that from its foundations was intended as sacred space, but American Muslim sacred space. I mean, what does that even look like? Right? What does that look like? I don't even think we know yet. One space that I like, it has some domes and stuff, is that the masjid in Dublin, Ohio. Yeah, is it Dublin, Ohio? I believe it's Dublin, Ohio. It has it clearly, when you enter it, feels like a Muslim sacred space, but it doesn't feel like something somebody dropped out of Marrakesh, like Marrakesh, or like somebody took it from Saudi Arabia and just dropped it in Ohio, right? So I think like that masjid has a very natural feel in terms of how it relates to its surroundings. Even in like how we name our centers, right? Now, mashallah, the platform we're meeting on this evening is the Downtown Islamic Center. See, that's cool to me, because it's like, that's what this is. This is the Downtown Islamic. This is the Islamic Center downtown. And it says to neighbors, says to colleagues, it actually says that you can enter. Like, okay, I'm interested in learning about Islam. This is the Downtown Islamic Center. We are downtown. I guess I can go in, right? But if it was called Masjid Dil Jalali wal Ikram, if it was, to someone who's a non-Arabic speaker, all that says is keep out, right? This is our thing. It has nothing to do with you, right? And some places that I love to pray have names like that, Masjid al-Ihsan. But I mean, to people in that neighborhood, what does Masjid, what does al-Ihsan, what does that mean? Masjid al-Ihsan. I mean, I'm sure they're probably able to surmise that Muslims worship in there, I think, right? But if you called it, Bronzeville Mosque, people that are from Bronzeville, have an interest in Bronzeville, feel some entitlement to what takes place in Bronzeville. They may venture inside. Well, they said this is the Bronzeville. I've never been to a mosque, but if it's the Bronzeville Mosque, I figure I can come in and check out what's going on in here, because I am a proud resident of Bronzeville. You see, so I think, are we really ready for an American Islamic culture? I don't know. I think a lot of us derive more comfort from our ancestral cultures than we probably realize, right? It's like, wait, this isn't supposed to look like this. Okay. Whew. Man, for a minute there, I was thinking this wasn't even a masjid until I saw, just something familiar to me. Okay, I'm okay. I haven't like died and gone to some American Islamic hell or something like that, but we have to be, and I personally, I really, I really look forward to, that more independence, but as I was saying at the beginning of the session, you guys especially just have to carry it forward and do so unapologetically, and just know that you're adding on, you're augmenting, your cultures, you're adding on, and in some cases keeping them going, because if you don't, whether your parents like it or not, you guys are the Indian Americans in America. You are the Indian Muslim Americans in America, right? MashaAllah. You guys are the Arab Americans in America. You are the continental African Americans in America, right? So if whatever culture that survives is going to survive with you, and the culture cannot survive with you unless you make it into something that resonates with you. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, it definitely answered my question. Thank you so much, Sheikh.
Alhamdulillah. Other ideas, questions?
Salam, this is Hafsa. I think this was an idea, but the idea that, like, I don't know, we say like Ramadan Mubarak, but if you're Pakistani, you say Ramzan. And for some reason, it's like, oh, saying Ramzan is wrong and you should be saying Ramadan. But in our language, like, that's how you say it. So I understand it's good to be like aspirational and try to say things correctly, but I think it's a balancing act of like trying to understand that there are words that you say in Urdu and it's okay to say it that way. You don't have to like.
Oh yeah, no, that's totally, in fact, I think it's a greater sign of eloquence when you, my roommate in college was multilingual, mashallah, he spoke, he was a white American that had learned Arabic, and he spoke German, and he spoke some Russian. And he would always say, when we speak English, we're anglicizing the words, right? And it's actually a greater show of eloquence that if you're speaking English to anglicize the word. He said, so why would you, he's like, why? Now he said, of course, sometimes speaking to a Muslim audience, it gets tricky, right? Because people, people might feel more strongly about the term masjid than they do mosque, right? Like mosque is something, it's like, they like the mosque. I don't know. Some people don't really relate to it. Like even like English speaking Muslims some of them don't relate to the term mosque. They relate to the term masjid. But it's actually quite pretentious to say every word that you're speaking in its original language. It's like, we used to joke that the person would say, like, there's a word in German, Weltanschauung, which means worldview, right? Weltanschauung, worldview. And you say, it would be just a pretentious douchebag move to say, the Weltanschauung, like you're speaking just like, no, it's just, why are you doing that? Or, when people use Frenchisms and they have to say it with the most perfect French accent, I only know a few Frenchisms, but
je ne sais quoi.
Je ne sais quoi. Je ne sais quoi. Oh, but that's not the one. The one I was looking for was the essential thing.
Are you thinking of Latin sine qua non?
No, the sine qua, that's Latin, but the raison d'être, raison d'être. I think that might be Latin too.
No, that's French.
That's French, right? The raison d'être. It's like, no, you don't have to, if a person does that and every, imagine somebody ordering pizza saying pizza. It's like, come on, man, just say pizza. We're speaking English. What are you, so if a person says Ramadan because they're referencing the term in Urdu, then it's just that they're not speaking Arabic. If a person says Zuhr, they're not speaking Arabic. If a person says Asr, they're not speaking Arabic. They're speaking a different language, but they're using the term. And I just think like things like that, they just require some maturity. It's like, no, I'm actually not speaking Arabic, right? If I say, have you made salat? And I don't say it with the sod. I don't say, have you made salat? I'm actually just anglicizing the term. And sometimes I do that. I don't always, hey babe, have you prayed Salatul Asr? It's like, have you prayed Asr? I'm speaking English. I'm not speaking Arabic. And I think that, I think that's just a function of maturity. And some people are very enthusiastic about Arabic, which is very cool, but come on, man, that's what we're going overboard a little bit. We're going overboard a little bit, right? Sometimes we speak Urdu, sometimes we speak Arabic, sometimes we speak English. I mean, come on, man. I mean, like one of my white American friends who's a convert to Islam, he said that he found that in talking to relatives about Islam, if he actually anglicized the words, they felt like they were talking about something that both of them shared. So if he said, a lot of Muslims in America, he felt, okay, we're having the same conversation. But every time he said Muslim, he said, I mean, what am I going to do? Use the harakat el muslimu. I mean, it's like that. I mean, it's like he just felt that when he did that, when they would say, so John, I was reading the Quran. And if he said the Quran with the qaf, the Quran, it would just drive kind of a wedge. Like, okay, so we're not even, this religion is definitely not for me because I can't even say the words. You know what I'm saying? Whereas when he just said, they said Quran, he said Quran. This is a very, very fluent Arabic speaker. But if they said Quran, he said Quran. If they said Islam, he said Islam, not El-Islam. Al-Quran, al-Muslimu. Muslims, no. Al-Muslimun. No, we're speaking English. We're speaking English. So, mashallah, very good point. Other things?
Assalamu alaikum. This is Rehan speaking.
Mashallah, Rehan, good to hear from you, man.
Likewise. Could you explain the context of La ikraha fid din, of there being no compulsion in religion and any cultural implications that has?
In Arabic, there's two kinds of statements. You have insha'i statements and khabari statements. An insha'i statement is a statement that it appeals to the listener to do something, right? Don't do this, do this, right? Don't do this, do this, right? A khabari statement is either true or false. That's how you can differ, right? And if we say something is insha in Arabic, that means that you're being told to do something or not do something. But if we say something is khabari, you're being told something that is falsifiable. Either it's true or it's false. Most people, and this is really, really interesting, especially when reading the English translation, they read that statement as an insha'i statement, like la ikraha fid din. What they read is la tukrihu ahadan ala dinik. Don't force anybody to be your religion. That's what they read. So they think like this is a command not to compel somebody to be Muslim or to practice some aspect of deen. When the strongest opinion, and in fact, everything I've seen about this in Arabic is this is a khabari statement. God is actually informing you. He's not telling you not to compel people to be Muslim. God is informing you that a person cannot be compelled to believe anything. See, we can't make anybody believe anything. You can force them to outwardly comply with your orders. You can make your children pray, right? And sometimes you have to do that. You have to do that, right? In terms of rearing them, you can make someone, offer lip service to some of your ideals, but you can't make anything enter anybody's heart. You can't do that. It's impossible. Nothing enters a person's heart. See that, and that's one of the things that is, subhanAllah, I think it holds out great. It's the last frontier for people being oppressed. That, in order to guarantee my safety, I can say anything. Oh yes, I believe. Oh yes, you're the best. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Oh no, I don't. No. But in terms of what's actually in my heart, no one has access to that. No one has access to that. Now, what's actually in a person's heart can change over time. And that's where kind of that outward and that inner, and that outward and that inward, are related. That a person can be exposed to something outwardly so much that they eventually accept it. But whenever they accept it, they will accept it on their own terms, not yours. You can't make anybody believe something. That's impossible. You can make somebody do something. You can say, pray, fast in the month of Ramadan. And even that, you can't make them fast because you don't know if they're really fasting or not. Right? Somebody slips off, gets a soda. You can't make anybody believe anything. So in as much as God is informing you, look, you can't make anybody believe anything. That is supposed to result in, stop, look, وَمَا عَلَيْكَ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغِ. Just, convey, offer a good word, point in the direction of truth, and, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Maybe the person will accept what you're saying. Maybe they will not. If you convey, you've done your due diligence, and then step back, right? In the context of culture, I think even more so than if God is saying you can't compel anyone to accept your religious beliefs, you certainly cannot compel anyone to accept your cultural practices, right? If it does not resonate with them, it does not resonate with them. And this is why I think religion becomes important, because if what the person is doing is halal, who are you to intervene, right? You've offered your feeling about it. And it's okay to have feelings about things. It's okay, right? I mean, truth be told, I have a 15-year-old, soon to be 15-year-old daughter. When I think about who she marries, I want them to be just like me. That's how I think about them. It's gonna be something like the dad, that will confirm that my daughter always did admire me. She always did. She wants her family to look something like, her immediate family. Oh, mashallah, what an honor to me and mom. But if she wants to marry someone who's nothing like me, not ethnically, not racially, but religiously, they're compatible. What am I gonna do? Compel? No, he must be Black American. No, if not, you don't have my blessing. How selfish is that, man? How selfish is that? Now I can make my wishes known, and I can even try to make a persuasive case. Whatever I want. But if she decides, I heard you out. I heard you out, and some of what you said, I definitely see the merits of some of what you said. But this is the man that I'm in love with, and he's white American, Muslim. What am I going to say besides Bismillah? Bismillah. I mean, I can't. I'm gonna make you marry somebody I want you to marry, and then what if it doesn't work out? What am I? Or if what am I do? What am I gonna do? Right? If you live and you're completely unfulfilled, and you are so constrained by this person's companionship, you have an affair. What are you going to say to Allah? Well, I was married to this person, but I shouldn't have been, but I was doing what my father told me. No, at some point we have to allow people to take responsibility for their own choices. Right? And that's what I understand by la ikraha fi din. Look, you can't, make your case, state your case, but don't force anybody. Make your case. Right? So, if you want, if you want to try to impress upon someone, I think, you definitely want to keep this cultural legacy that we've built going, et cetera, and then make the case. But if the person doesn't accept that, if the person is thinking about a different cultural legacy that they want to start, or maybe it has nothing to do with the cultural legacy, but rather this is the person with whom I fell in love. What you gonna say? Really, what can you say? And that's what that verse means, I think, Rehan, in the context of culture. What can you say? They don't want to, okay, this is what you want them to do. For the wedding, and I really see a lot of this playing out in relationship and weddings. Instead of going like a strict Palestinian wedding or strict, South Asian wedding, they want kind of a hybrid. They want some South Asian influences, some Palestinian influences, also some American influences. So, the bride wants to wear white and she wants to walk down an aisle. And it's like, goodness gracious, I do understand that marriage, it is for family in some respects, but it's also for the participants. This is their special day. Let them have it the way they want to have it. Why would you? I don't know, but I don't know. Let some people tell it we're just Americans and we don't have any culture, so we don't understand. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know, Rehan, does that answer the question?
Yeah, it did. So
right. Other questions, ideas? We still have a few minutes. We haven't heard from Asra in a while. MashaAllah.
I could share something if no one else. Um, something you were saying at the beginning of class, like I think a lot of children of immigrants relate to like for example, if you're Desi, you're not Desi enough for the motherland, but you're not American enough for here. But I think as I got older, you kind of realize you kind of have you can have the best of both worlds. Like you have a lot of latitude to take what you appreciate about your parents' culture and adopt new things from here, even not from American culture, even from like other cultures.
Yeah,
I can give you like a quick example.
please.
Like I remember when I went to India a couple of years ago, I was really shocked at the practice of dowry, and I thought it was just really against the spirit of Islam, the way it's practiced there. And I was very critical with my relatives. And my dad actually took me aside and he's like, you know, you have to kind of check yourself because you living in America have kind of the liberty to discard that more or less.
Yes.
Whereas they have all this like intense pressure, societal expectation to go along with it. So kind of like those kind of experiences kind of shifted my thinking to like, it's kind of a blessing to be part of both cultures, and whether they're Islamic things from your parents' culture that are Islamic, like I don't know, hospitality, respecting your elders, even frivolous things like food. It can also be a bit like like the expectations and pressure notwithstanding. There's also a lot of privilege you have as being a child of immigrants and being able to shape your own culture that people in other countries really just don't have.
Yeah. I totally relate. You know, I think, you know, one thing that I've observed is that if you look at cultural practices as kind of representative of kind of a unique organism, like it has its own kind of like ecosystem, most things make sense in a particular context. I didn't say that they were all healthy or that some of them were not toxic, but the way that those things relate to everything else, right? It's kind of like by virtue of the fact that these are cultures that have been developed over, you know, many years and have responded to many things within the environment, everything kind of fits together, right? So in a place where, you know, many women are, you know, working professionals, and in fact, it's become the expectation that you know a woman would have a means of supporting herself, and modes of economic production have, you know, shifted dramatically. That, you know, there used to be a time when, you know, if you didn't have a strong back, you know, and you weren't prepared to, you know, work, manual task, it would be very hard for you to experience upward mobility or to go from, you know, nothing to something. That isn't the case in the kind of modern industrialized, you know, a postmodern industrialized, you know, West, and even and perhaps now more than ever. The dowry in that context, of course, is not going to be it whether it's small or large, it's still something understood to be a symbolic gesture. It's just a symbolic thing, you know. It's not really a big deal. And we also have, you know, a civil law system that, you know, alimony is a part of that system, right? Those kinds of institutions. So dowry really becomes even more symbolic, right? When you have alimony and things of that sort, and you know, women whose earning potential either approach, match, or even exceed, you know, their husbands oftentimes. In a culture where the expectation is still that the man would provide everything, and that a woman will receive support from some male, a husband, if not a husband, then a father, if not a father, then a brother, if not a brother, then an uncle, etc. Dowry becomes kind of a critical security mechanism, that if this marriage fails, what money would I have to transition into the next phase of my life? Right? It actually has a very real, and in traditional articulations of Islamic law, because of that responsibility to support women, there was no concept of alimony. You really didn't have that. So in places like that, dowry, of course, acquires, in addition to kind of the implicit symbolism of, kind of like how big is the diamond, how big is the dowry, how wealthy the couple, how opulent the wedding, etc. All of that is just going to be there whenever we're talking about anything that can be quantified. But in addition to that, it kind of has this real kind of like purpose, real meaning. In our context, those things tend to be, they tend to be less important. And what I think, and I know the brothers on the call are like, yeah, that's right, Ubayd, that's right. I think embracing that to say, it's just not as big a deal for us, right? It's just not, it's not a big, I don't have to like hold this man who just began his career 2 years ago, hold his feet to the fire for, $75K. No, maybe a small amount of cash and a ring of a precious metal and a precious stone. That, that should suffice. But in other places, the thing that throws me off, Asra, is like, even among, Muslim cultures that are economically depressed, there's still all of this emphasis on premarital gifts and the gold and it's like, how is somebody supposed to come up with all of this in Yemen? And I'm looking around and I'm seeing unspeakable poverty. That just always blew me. But alhamdulillah. Other things. Anybody else have something? Let's see who I got on this call. Bismillah. Khalid, you're just making a cameo, or do you have something interesting as you normally do?
Don't have anything interesting today, but I just I missed seeing you, so I joined in.
No, man, this is believe it or not, man, we're quickly approaching a year, man.
I know.
I mean, it's like I'm just holding on for dear life at this point, man. It's been a year, right? I mean, but on the other hand, I haven't traveled for work since the first week of March.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, bro, it would be very difficult to go back to traveling 3 times a month, 4 times a month. I mean, I've fallen in love with, my home life. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So professionally, I don't know what that means for me. Like people are saying, the vaccine is, kind of beginning to proliferate slowly. And I'm like, man, I want to get back to working. I want to get back to earning money, but man, I've kind of enjoyed being home with my children on the weekend. I don't know, man. It's just, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I went and spent a few months with my parents and stayed with them for a bit. And that was nice.
So where are your parents?
They're in Philadelphia.
Oh, mashallah, you went back to Philly, huh?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Are they in Philly proper or like Nicetown or like
they're in the suburbs, so they're like Southwest Philly.
Oh, like the main line or something?
Yeah. Are you familiar with Media, Pennsylvania and Swarthmore College area?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Mashallah, man. That must have been cool, man. That must have been cool.
Yeah, it was nice. And I just came back not too long ago, and so I don't have my mom to hang out with every day, so now I can get back into the Zoom culture.
I bet you were eating really well, man.
Well, I was.
Alhamdulillah. Anyone have anything else? Okay, mashallah. Wow. Well, as always, man, it's an honor and a pleasure to see so many familiar, names. Alhamdulillah, man. The last 3 weeks was when Ranna sent me the topic of discussion for today. I responded phew, huge sigh of relief. You know, I've been on Khalid, I don't know if you've been following, but bro, I've been on the hot seat, man. You know, I've been on the hot seat. Some you know, very unfortunate circumstance took place, and as a community, we were just trying to work it out, trying to work through it, and I was just impressed, man, with just the compassion and the love and the character of people in our community. So, you know, big hand to you guys. Inshallah, I look forward to seeing you next week, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات